Holy God, we thank you as we come to the closing moments of our camp meeting. Help us to have a clearer understanding of your word as we have learned and been taught this weekend in both our public and our private conversations, that you are trying to show us not to take anything for granted. Help us to be diligent students of prophecy and to continue the work of development that you begun in each of us. In Jesus' name, amen. The studies that we have been doing over this weekend were a continuation of the subject of the Second Amendment, which I'd like to rephrase or reframe as civil rights. So we spoke about this subject in several different ways. And we covered material that has been in the public domain in this movement for several years. What tends to happen is the following. I'll bring up a subject and it's unlikely that we will come to a conclusion and then I will revisit the subject at a future date. When I choose to close down a subject and discuss it in the future, I try to leave it in a place that has a level of closure for people so they can understand something about the subject. And what can tend to happen afterwards is one of two scenarios. Often it's the second one. So the first scenario is straight revision. I'll bring up the same terminology, the same idea, the same concept. The example might be slightly different, but the phraseology is the same. The second way a subject is revisited, the framework is different, the language is different, the model is different. And when I do that, which is more frequent, often people don't realize that this is a continuation of the same subject. They see it as something new. And we may agree or disagree of whose responsibility it is to know whether it's new or continuation. So an example of that, several years ago, I brought the subject of the nature of humanity before the movement. There was nothing particularly new or radical about doing that. But what caught people in the movement off guard were some of the definitions that I used. So the main one was the definition of sinful nature. What does sinful nature mean? For many people, I turned its definition upside down for them. Unbeknown to me, which means I didn't know, that subject, the nature, I'm going to call it of Christ, would cause a shaking and people would leave over that subject. Because this was a subject that came straight out of inspiration, that people in my circle of friends had been discussing for over a decade before, 10 years. And I naively assumed that people would either agree with it or at least accept it once it was explained. They didn't. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was 2017. I left the subject alone. The following year, the midnight cry is going to come. It's several years later. Say it's post 2020, but it may be 19 or it coming into 20. I'm going to do a number of studies now on rhetoric. Hopefully that's spelt right. I don't know. It doesn't look it, but on the subject of rhetoric, it's not. Someone's. Better get it right. I'll get into trouble. R. I dealt with the subject of rhetoric. Subject of debate. But I approached the subject not as an exercise in debating skill, but how to teach. And so I developed all of that. I may have my sequence wrong, because I think a little bit before that, tackled the subject of fast and slow brain. And I think that was first, and then rhetoric was second. And I think many people didn't appreciate that both those subjects was the same subject as the nature of humanity. I'll ask a question. Why was this fast brain, slow brain study significant? If you can connect it to the original study. Raquel? Wait, please, wait. Please just give the answer. Don't give a preamble. Just give the answer. Why was it significant?
Because it shows us how we work, our brain works.
This person over here? Curtis, right? That's the wrong answer.
Because it addresses what would be considered sin and not sin as related to our sinful nature and the decisions we make.
Good answer.
I can't remember what I said.
No, but I will in a minute. I'm gonna repeat it. Or I'll give my opinion, which I think is... Did you want to say something? Okay, so when we did the original study, we said there's higher and lower passions. I can't remember what year fast brain, slow brain is. Is it 21, 20? Go with 21. 4 years later, I'm going to take this model and I'm going to use different ideology, a different phraseology. It's not literally Bible, but I'm going to put Bible. You will put in your notes inspiration. So inspired statements or phrases. And then I'm going to use a secular source. And I'm going to use the phrase fast brain, slow brain. I don't know if people that are understood that. Hopefully you did, if I haven't in the past explained it clearly. So the reason why Raquel's answer wasn't sufficient is because her answer would apply to both of these. But there's the development here. What's the key thought that was attached to, I'll call it study 1? The thought that I spoke about over and over again so that it would be fixed in your minds. Power of the will. I don't know if you picked up what Curtis said. What's the problem with that? Is there a problem with that? This here, that's what was taught, that's what I've said. Is there a problem with that? Put your hands up if there's a problem with it. Put your hands up if there's not a problem with it. All of those are inspired statements, by the way. That's an inspired statement. It's a bit more. It's the true force of the will, the governing power, all of that. It's right there. No problems? We don't know anymore? If I'd asked that 7 years ago, everybody said, Amen. And now you're scared to say Amen. You need to ask yourself why. What's changed in 7 years that now you'll become jaded? You'll become skeptical of what is right and wrong. Okay, so the answer to that is that this statement is wrong. I'm going to have to put the word governing. The ruler. So the will is not the governing power or the governing force of a human being. Who knows that already? Only a few people. This study demonstrated that. I've put the word wrong to simplify things for us, so we understand the concept. Because it's not really wrong. What word should we use? Okay, I'll accept incomplete. I'm just going to put limited. If you're taking notes, incomplete, write that there. Incomplete. It's not the complete picture. So this model says what? What's the governing force in a human being? Emotions, which is lower powers. The lower powers control and govern the human being. So what does that do for you? Your concept of the gospel. It turns it upside down. Because you were taught this ideology, number one, that when you shouted at your child, your spouse, and you say sorry, won't do it again, what do you do again? The same thing. And you say, oh, the problem is what? Another book that's coming to our movement, it's not will. Habit. I've just got bad habits. Pick a time period. 30 to 90 days. Practice makes perfect. If you've read the book, it's not true, because most of you have been trying this all your life and it doesn't work. And until you get additional information and put the pieces of the puzzle together, you end up living a fake or false gospel. And our movement is full of these erroneous ideas. They're erroneous not because they're wrong, but because they're limited. So this is not a problem of habit. It's a problem of human nature. Because you can't change this. You can't change your slow and fast brain. It's been built into you. Once you understand that, it explains much of human behavior and your own. But what it should do for you is not only help you to understand yourself, but it should help you to understand other people. And I think we don't follow through with some of these ideas. I'm not here to give you a reading list. It's difficult to develop your thoughts, your ideas from news articles. You need to read a book to help the author to guide you through a life-changing understanding of some issue. these are not the only two books that I have publicly spoken about, but they're two important books that have changed the mindset of this movement. This was one. And the other one was the gendered brain, to demonstrate that there is no such thing as a male or female brain. Which again is in agreement with study one. When you go to inspiration, it doesn't say this is how a male or a female brain works. It says this is how the human brain works. So all of those things are dealing with the same subject, but in different ways. And then we spoke about how to teach. And according to some people, I'm not really qualified to explain this because I'm not a good teacher. Which is fine. So then we went to this Greek, I think it's Greek idea of rhetoric. How you go about teaching. So I want us to see that this is a continual theme that's been running through my teaching over several years. And yesterday, it's been a long weekend, followed on from the subject of the Second Amendment. Before we move on, does anybody have any questions on what I've just addressed? A real question? Tamina.
I didn't pick up how teaching in that is connecting to the nature of humanity.
So I'm not going to prove it here, the argument, but to put it simply, the Greeks had worked out the three components, if we call it, of rhetoric. And the reason we should use and develop those skills is because that's how human brains work. Why you go to sleep with certain speakers and not with other ones. Why body language becomes significant. Understanding human psychology, teaching effective. That was the point of that. Don't call it teaching, call it evangelism. Most of us are bad evangelists. Curtis? No? Okay. So we're going to move on to the Second Amendment. You have a question? Behind you.
So, did you equate or make a difference between habit and the fast brain? Maybe I'm confused with it.
No. What the logic that I just spoke of here, I can't say no to your question. Let me re-explain what I said. The reason you keep on sinning is not bad habit. Neither is it sinful nature. The shaking that happened in study one was based upon the definition of sinful nature. I don't know if you remember. I said sinful nature is the same as what? The same as what? Someone can just shout it out. Sinless nature. There's no fundamental difference between the two. If you don't understand that, these various components, I don't think you can understand what our present message is. So a lot of the comments that I have made off screen this weekend privately, but also that I've spoken about publicly in previous presentations about feminism, I don't think you can understand clearly without having this historical context. These are not random thoughts. Even if I may give the impression that they are. Did I answer your question? No. I'm going to move on. Second Amendment. So follow on from, I think someone said 6 presentations back in time. I made a point. Can't even remember what the point was. It doesn't matter. People say this is the final story of the Second Amendment. Get into a conversation with somebody, and time and chance, people, oh, coincidence, and people's prejudices or ideas of what's right and wrong form the basis of a conversation that I have with somebody. I agree to tackle the subject of the Second Amendment, and what either starts off or appears as some random subject ends up becoming a continuation of a study I think that was done 5 years ago. And now, a week ago, when it's tackled, the subject of the Second Amendment, what am I not worried about in last week's study? What don't I care about? You can shout out an answer. Just, no, not that. One word. I don't care about guns. The story of the conversation begins with guns, Second Amendment. I'm not interested in that. What am I interested in? Self-defense. Why am I interested in self-defense? Someone said civil rights, someone said prophetic. No to both of those. Because it's the nature of humanity. And if you're not, I guess if you don't, not told it, perhaps you don't see it. If you're not told or it's explained, these are all recurring themes. So I'm going to call this 5. 5. Because tucked into here was 2019 Second Amendment. Okay. Yep. So this is the same subject. But when I spoke about it in 19, it seemed disconnected. Can you confirm it was 19? Because I said it 3 or 4 times. Okay, someone's double checking. So well, we'll change that in a minute because I've said it a few times. Who said? 19. We'll go with 19. So the Second Amendment, it's not about guns. It's about self-defense. I want to add a key word in here, so I'll answer it because you won't know what it is. Because I've not given you enough context to know what the word is, so I won't ask you. The way it was taught last week, or the way you think it was taught last week, either way, or the impression that you got, I will ask for the key word, is based upon molding or conditioning, which is number 3. What's the Second Amendment about? Guns, but just fill in a phrase or a sentence. What's the key word? Right. So as soon as you get the right to bear arms, what are you going to do? No. You're going to transfer the right about gun, and you're going to turn that into your right for self-defense. Now you've got a right to defend yourself. Put your hands up if you agree, but upon last week and this week, in 2019, if you have a right of self-defense. Put your hands up if you've got a right to defend yourself. Okay, so most of you put your hands up, and it's the wrong answer. It's the wrong answer because you've not been keeping track of this subject. If I say it's your right, I won't pick up your question. If you say it's your right, that infers you have a choice. It infers you have a choice if you have a right. I have a right to turn the other cheek or not, to argue back or be silent, be swift to hear, slow to speak, choose. And so that's how we define or put in parameters the issue of self-defense. Now, I'm not saying there's not truthfulness to that. But if that's where you reside, you will make, in your thinking, you will make wrong conclusions, wrong decisions. You don't have a right for self-defense. You don't have a choice. You don't have a choice to defend yourself. Someone said, why? We'll go here, We'll take the layperson's term of fast brain. So someone said instinct, which I'll put down. What's this? Fight, freeze, and flight. Thank you, Mark. People forget the freeze. Fast brain, can you control it? No. You don't have a choice to engage. And that's where you put fighting. So you know from all these definitions, you don't have a choice for self-defense. It's built into your system. Now, you can give yourself, take a breath and have a 10-second pause. You can engage the lazy brain. Then you can choose or a right, etc., etc. But at the fundamental level, at its core, you don't have a choice for self-defense. You won't get from a Second Amendment or a Supreme Court decision. You get it by understanding human nature. So these are all recurring themes. They're not independent studies. Okay, any questions so far? Walter? Thank you.
Sorry.
Put it really close, otherwise they can't hear.
When I think of fight or flight or freeze, for me, fight is self-defense, but freeze or flight, to me, it seems like you don't defend yourself if you run away or you freeze. Like, so how does that work? Yeah.
Well, without going into the details, there's chatter over here that's answered your question. You can show, if you go to the core principle, that each of those are the same thing. But ignore these two. Fighting is part of the fast brain. Fast brain, there's no choice, no control, no right. It's innate. Is that innate? It's innate. It's built into. You can't control it. There's some elements of it that you can control. But if you stay at that level, you come to wrong decisions and wrong conclusions. Any questions or comments? No? Sure. Yes or no? Okay. If we're okay all the way through here so far, we can pick whatever subject we want. And if you haven't walked through 7 or 8 years of history and seen how this concept has been threaded through at least my studies, every time I talk about something, it just seems random or disconnected, and you don't know what to do with those things. We're Adventists. You know, you can't explain the New Testament without understanding the Old. Likewise, you can't understand a prophecy without understanding the Bible. You expose yourself to danger. You come to wrong conclusions. And I want to show us so easy to do that. So this is not an exercise in you telling me off. Why didn't you tell us this was this subject? That 5 was 1. I'm saying that's not my responsibility. You have all the tools in front of you, and you should know this methodology, because it's called threading. Thread. See, wheels upon wheels, whatever you want to call it, these are not new concepts. Even the methodology isn't new. If I made this look difficult, so I was up here and I said, actually, I've lost my thought. I don't even know what I'm talking about. You wouldn't come. I'm required to make it look easy. Unless you prefer to have dumb people stand up and try to show you something. Ignorant, uneducated. That's not, I don't see that as an argument where people say, well, you make it look easy, but when I try it, I can't do it. Or you tell me, like I'm keeping some secrets from you. If that's what you felt, I've given you 7 years. I've opened up. Right? Don't take the criticism, Arian, because I don't think it's fair, a fair criticism. I've been open and frank about what I teach, the style, and why I do things. And I'm 100% sure when I got to number 3, I said that I had done 1, 2, 3. So that's already in the public domain. 4 and 5 may not have been. And 5 is only last week. Arian.
May I add a thought?
Yes, right.
Another thought that shows that it's not a new thing. Because I think as a movement in the last, especially I think in the last 5 years or longer, but 5 years, with the message of, with the Midnight Cry message and the message on sexism, feminism and radical feminism. We as a movement have required from people in the movement men and women, but especially women in this context, that you cannot stay in an abusive relationship. So living in an abusive relationship, you're required to stop that as a man and as a woman. So in the case of the woman, you're not allowed to say, I'll just stay here because that is causing less trouble. And then we have said it is required that you stand up for yourself, defend yourself, and do whatever that is necessary. So here I see another, this is an example of how we require self-defense, that it's not a choice. And that's been part of, within our movement, at least for the last minimum 5 years.
Any comments, questions? What are the key phrases you used? You said feminism, radical feminism,
abuse, harassment.
Abuse, harassment. Okay. So we'll just recap that. Okay. So someone asked a question. I put it on the forum so you can see it. Should have it now. So I'm just going to read it straight for the translators. What is the movement's prophetic understanding of the ongoing crisis in Gaza and Ukraine? Does self-defense provide a moral justification for the humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza and Ukraine? Couple of things. First of all, I like the question because it's phrased well. Often we ask bad questions. It's limited and specific. Another observation, I've had this question asked in several different ways by several different people. But they all say essentially the same thing. What is the movement's prophetic understanding of the ongoing crisis in Gaza and Ukraine? So that's part one. Does self-defense provide a moral justification for the humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza and Ukraine? Who wants to have a go at answering that? We'll go with question one, the easier of the two. The easier of the two. We'll say your, not the movement. What's your prophetic understanding of what's going on, the crisis that's going on in Gaza and Ukraine? Explain what's going on there. Not sure? Too difficult? Too scared? Simba?
Voice is paid.
Put the microphone really close. You can swallow it.
I can't answer.
You can't answer?
Yeah,
You don't know the answer or you don't want to answer?
I don't know the answer.
You don't have an opinion?
All right.
What's your understanding of the crisis that's in Gaza and Ukraine?
I don't know the answer.
Is it a good fight, a bad fight?
It's bad because there is the abuse of human rights because of the ongoing war which is taking place.
Who's bad?
I think Gaza.
You got two people that are fighting, two protagonists in each war. You said it's bad.
Yeah.
Are you saying the consequences are bad or the protagonists are bad? The people who are fighting?
The consequences. Of course, the consequences.
Okay, you're saying the consequences are bad.
Bad. Yeah.
All the warriors are good. But what they're doing is bad.
What they are doing is bad.
But they're good people who are doing it.
No.
Who's bad? Everybody?
Yes.
The Ukrainians are bad and the Russians are bad.
That's my opinion. Yeah.
That's fine. What they do, the people are bad and they're doing bad things.
Yes, please.
Okay. Anything?
Nothing. Yeah.
No? Tamina? What's your prophetic understanding of the ongoing crisis in Gaza and Ukraine?
I would see two prophetic players active.
Two prophetic players.
Yep.
Ukraine, name them.
King of the South versus King of the North.
Name them.
Russia versus United States.
So Tamina says that the Ukraine war is a battle between the United States and Russia. Gaza?
I would say the player Islam.
Islam versus?
The world.
Islam versus the world.
Yes.
Okay. And you have an opinion on each of those stories about those players. Who's good and who's good or bad in Ukraine? Well, it doesn't work that way. I don't know.
I can see the self-defense work out in Ukraine. The Ukraine is self-defending itself.
You said America is fighting. And now you've switched to Ukraine is fighting.
Because America is represented in proxy.
Okay, so it's the Ukrainians versus the Russians, and the Ukrainians are Americans. Proxy.
Yeah.
So who are the good people?
None.
The Ukrainians are bad.
Well, what is the
Don't ask me any questions.
Okay.
You just said the Ukrainians are bad. I'll finish the sentence. For defending themselves.
No. They're good for defending themselves.
So that means that America is good.
I guess in that context.
America is good, Russia is bad.
Mm-hmm.
That's your prophetic understanding.
At the moment, yeah.
Okay. And why is America beating Russia up?
Because they're violating national law.
No, it's because it's a stepping stone to taking over the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
So who's the aggressor now? Who wants to take over the world?
I guess you want to tell.
No, not what I
United
want to
States?
tell. You tell me what you want to tell.
The United States.
So the proxy of the United States is whom?
Ukraine.
If the master's bad, the servant must be bad. So now who are the good people?
Now it would be the Russians.
Question said prophetically. Our instinct is to go,
Emotional.
or morality-wise, yes. This is why yesterday's discussion was important. Because when you start going moral, you start coming up with funny ideas. Use any stronger word you want to. Go to Gaza. Who are the good people and the bad people there?
Depends where you start the story, I guess.
There's a war in Gaza. You start it where you want to start it.
So the good people are the Palestinians.
So the Palestinians are good. And you called them a minute ago, they were who?
Islam.
Okay, so we'll leave it there.
Don't leave me hanging.
No, I don't want to go. I don't want to force you down the path of public record. Anybody else want to say anything? No? Okay, so I wanted to show us when someone asks a relatively simple question, what's our prophetic understanding of what's going on in the Ukraine? Who's telling the truth? Who are the two people? USA, Russia, Biden. Who's telling the truth? Whose version is the right one? Why have you got two different answers? What is America doing? It wants to take over the world. Daniel 11, verse 41. Who's stopping them? Russia is. Whose rights is Russia defending? Who? Your rights. Every single one of you, Russia's defending your rights. Which means, who's your proxy? We get it? I don't know what it means prophetically, except that it's morally, because they're the same thing. So you adjust your version of morality, or you adjust your version of prophecy. Set your marker and then see where it leads you. Because all of you, whoever you are, I don't know what the questioner thinks, are saying, as Tamina did, the good people are the West. Bad people are the East, the Russians. Until you start analyzing it, not prophetically, just morally, economically. See what the beginning and the end is. 91. What did they say? We all know that? It's only a couple of people said it. Maybe they beat you to it. This is the beginning of the New World Order. Monica, why is it 1991?
You mean 2 years after 1989?
2 years after 1989. For those of us who don't know, what does 2 years after 1989 mean? What do you mean?
It was a pattern that elder test was showing.
No,
that,
no.
Not that.
You tell me what it means. If you don't know, I'll ask someone else. But you got the right date, you got the right logic. But tell me, what do you mean 2 years after some date?
I only know what she was
So
showing.
you don't know. Anyone else on this side besides Tamina? No, it's not the fall of the Soviet Union, because that date would be 1989, if we go with that. 2 years later. In 1989, America hasn't succeeded. They inflict a wound. 91. It's the fall. It's the death. Is that what you're going to say? We good? It's just by 91, you can mark that the Soviet Union has died. That's all. Monica said 2 years. She gave a year. I didn't say that. Shh. Sorry. Monica said 2 years. I said, that's good. Explain it, which is what you've asked. She could explain it. So someone said it marks the death. It happened to be 2 years after 89. That's all. So once the Soviet Union dies, what's America saying? Past, present, or future? Present. Now we have a new world order, and they made a mistake. They may have done away with the Soviet Union, but they forgot to deal with the head. You want to call it that? And they made a strategic mistake because they don't understand the nature of humanity. What did they think? We're going to solve this problem. What did they think about human beings? No, Curtis. Once you beat them up, they take it. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to ask.
Okay, fine.
They said everybody works with slow brains. They'll use their common sense. We'll open the gas and oil markets up to them. They'll all become billionaires. And they'll become sensible. And what ends up happening is these Russians are on fast brain. At least Putin is. He doesn't care how much money you give him. What does he want? Revenge. Fast brain. And so they make this strategic mistake because they don't understand the nature of humanity. And now they've got this thing, I don't want to say something insulting, but they've got this entity that has risen up like a phoenix, and now they're going to have to deal with it a second time, which is what they're trying to do now to bring their new world order to a conclusion. So when we say, depends how you look at it, morally or prophetically, I'm not sure what you mean by those terms. Because if I take it morally, who wants to be run by a dictatorship? All of you do. Because you trust, who do you trust more than Biden? Don't answer. You already know who you trust more. So you can't argue that, oh, morally speaking. So question number 2. And we'll close here. I don't know what the questioner is, what they have in their mind. Now it gets more pointed. Does self-defense provide a moral justification for the humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza and the Ukraine? We'll confine our discussion to the Ukraine. The lack of time. Not Sabbath, so we can... Oh, it is Sabbath. We can't stretch the truth. So, who wants to venture on this one? Self-defense is going on there. Ukraine, by the way, who's defending themselves? Who's the self-defense? The Ukrainians. We'll go with the Ukraine. They're the ones that got their land invaded, simplistically. Yes, I understand. We've addressed the issue of Putin a moment ago. In Gaza, who's defending themselves? No, not Gaza, the whole thing. The Gaza war that we currently have, who is defending themselves? Okay. Once again, we've got 2 answers. Why are we keep getting 2 answers? This late in the day. No one can see you. Put your hands up if it's Israel that is defending themselves. Put your hands up if it's the Palestinians that are defending themselves. Okay, so I don't know why we've got different answers, except this Gaza war I'll just put war. An approximate date. Brian, just shout it out and I'll repeat it. Start date for the war in Gaza. "2023, Brian said. Yes? Ignatius, start date. Start date for the war in Gaza.
Started a long time ago.
Approximate date.
1948.
Who said yes? You said 23.
Well, I thought you meant current.
I didn't. I asked a question.
So I'll go with 1948.
So depending on what date you want to go, depends or defines who is into self-defense. So you make your decisions where you want to place all of this. Do you want to place it back here, 70 years ago? Or recently? So in the media, they're going to place it last year. Who's defending themselves? Israel. So we'll go with that. So the question is, you know that's what the questioner is asking, don't you? Does self-defense provide a moral justification to the humanitarian crisis in where? In Gaza. There's no humanitarian crisis in Israel. So we know where the war is. And what's producing that crisis? According to the questioner. Self-defenses that's causing the crisis. And the people that are producing, who's producing the crisis? Israel is. So they're the ones that are defending themselves. So when we give our answers, we have to give it in the context of the question or the parameters that are set before us. So it can't be 48. The question defines it. If we're okay with that, so the self-defense of Ukraine, is there a moral justification for it when you consider the humanitarian crisis? Who's doing the self-defense there?
Fighting in self-defense. Same like Israel. He's overplayed the self-defense.
So most people would say that the Ukrainians are defending themselves. It's their land that is experiencing an humanitarian crisis. And the question is their self-defense justifiable? And you'd all say yes. Because they are what? They're being attacked, and they're a militia that now is protecting the state. So if we're going to address it from that perspective, the Ukrainians are correct, aren't they? What we say from a moral perspective, but from a prophetic one, from a moral one, we can't do that. Depends where. It's not about morality and prophecy. It's about the scale. If you're going to make them proxies, when did the Ukrainian war begin? 1989. It's 1989 or 1991, but we're going with 89. That's the better date. That's when the war begins. When America stands up and starts attacking the USSR, the King of the South. But if you're going to mark 2 years ago as your starting point, you come to different answers. And these are not moral or prophetic issues. These are issues of scale. But what we have done, or what we tend to do, we saw yesterday, if I look at things morally, or if I look at things prophetically, that's not the way to approach it. You have to be guided, controlled by what? Methodology, rules. Prophecy was seen to be a delineation of events. The reason I didn't put the word figurative is because we're using names, which means it's not figurative anymore. So prophecy is a line which has waymarks. And if it's a line that's got waymarks, then you're forced to understand these humanitarian crises are occurring in a prophetic framework, or it's just noise. If it's noise, that's fine. If it's prophetic, and I think all of you have in some shape or form said that these issues are prophetic, the dynamics or the control isn't prophecy or morality. It's waymarks. And the primary waymark we have, 1989, 2001, Sunday law, and we're somewhere here. And I know we've got waymarks in there. But if you're going to begin the struggle in Ukraine, in what year? No, in what year? The bad year. In 22, you're going to come up with strange answers. Because Putin will remind you of what? The war didn't begin in 22. This is the culmination of what, we'll say, the West has been forcing Russia to do. That's their narrative. Go to the left, and what did they tell you? That narrative is false. Forgive me if you don't agree, but all of you believe that. 99% of us. It's really easy if you start asking questions about morality to make grave mistakes. Why do we do that? Why do we go to this morality thing? Nature? Religion? Christianity? SDA roots? Fast brain? is because we define our humanity in positive terms. We're supposed to be good. So anybody that causes harm for whatever reason becomes bad. And if we live in that framework, we might think we're morally righteous, but you end up coming to strange ideas. What happens if you stick to the prophecy? What does that make you? It makes you bad. People say you're bad because you don't care about whom? Killing whom? Women and children. That's where you get to it. And then they say, you're opposing the message. Because radical feminists don't bear arms. It's not in their nature to do so. Or some variation of that theme. So let's summarize. All of these topics are a continual theme. We didn't speak about radical feminism, left wing, right wing. You're going to come to wrong conclusions if you don't have these ideas as a foundation on which to base conclusions of other subjects. Second Amendment is not a right to bear arms. It's an explanation of human nature that you will defend yourself. Do you defend yourself 24/7? Sure you do. Spoken to a couple of people. It's called your immune system. And in English, at least part of that immune system, they call what? Killer cells. They might add some other words to it. They've got one function in life: to seek, destroy, and kill. And that's built into your system. Why won't you turn the other cheek to a virus or a bacteria? Don't you do that? Why did you get vaccinated and kill all of those poor vaccines that invade you, who are looking for a warm, cozy place to live? You say, not in my house. How selfish is that? So I made that point. Then we had a question about the rights and wrongs of what's going on in Europe and we'll say Asia or the Middle East. And it's very easy, if we're not careful, to say this movement should take the high moral ground. Not worry about this army or that army or their ideologies. Why are you not raising your voice in defense of whom? Humanitarian crisis of whom? Women and children. Because they're the ones that get hurt the most. Why are you silent on that? Why don't you have a movement position on that? And your answer is? Silence. So all I wanted to show in that response to that question, you can raise your voice. You can give support materially, emotionally, through prayer. That you're saddened by the human cost of all of that. That's fine. But it asks for the movement's position. And you can't address that issue without understanding why this warfare is going on. To have an understanding of the protagonist, who are in the right, who are in the wrong. Who are defending themselves and who are attacking. And when you do that, I'm not so sure it's easy to give this easy movement position. To me, it becomes more complicated. It's easy to say it's wrong for women and children to suffer. We could all agree with that. I don't know what percentage it is, but the Ukrainian army has got a very high proportion of women compared to almost any other army except Israel. My guess is Israel's got a high proportion of women. So when we start talking about the Ukraine and the humanitarian crisis in the Ukraine, those women aren't just standing by. They're combatants. They're fighting. Either physically, but definitely emotionally. So it's, to me, the whole thing is not that straightforward if we want to start talking about movement positions on things. It's good to say we're sorry for all the deaths, but I'm sorry for all of the deaths. Why should I be more sorry about these ones? And I don't mean that in a heartless way. I'm not unsympathetic to what's going on there. But the question gave it in a framework. And when I look at the framework, this is the framework of the great controversy, where pieces on the chessboard are now going to be put in place to defend something. And this is not a new concept. Who's protecting you? God's people. In Ukraine. King of the South is. And many of us find that conceptually hard to believe because we're in this warfare. and we live on the wrong side of the line, and it can become confusing unless you stick to the rules. Let's go to prayer. Holy God, we thank you. It's my hope and prayer that despite speaking about sensitive subjects in an objective way, that people may be offended or hurt. It's not my intention that that should happen, and I know it's not yours, Lord. But as we discuss our emotional response to what's going on all around us, help each of us behave like you have to behave, to put morality in its true framework. When we do that, we can better understand the great controversy from your perspective. We can better understand why you have allowed and participated in your humanitarian crisis. In Jesus' name. Amen.